and welcome to Glasgow in 2024 Presents. My name is Esther McCallum-Stewart and I'm the chair of the Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our online events. I hope you enjoy this event, and if you do, why not take a moment to see what else we have coming up online at glasgow2024.org. All of our events are broadcast live, but if you want to watch or listen again, you can find them all online at our YouTube channel. Please feel free to join in the conversation on social media. We'll be using the hashtag #GIN2024 across Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And you can also find us there at Glasgow in 2024. If you would like to become a supporter of the bid, you can do so at glasgow2024.org/pre-support. Or if you want to volunteer to get involved, then please check out our volunteer page on our website. We can't currently be together, but we do hope we can bring a little bit of the Glasgow 2024 spirit and joy to you wherever you are in the world. Enjoy the event, and thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to Balkan Witches and Folk Horrors with Shtriga Books, presented by Glasgow in 2024. Shtriga Books is a small publishing house from Croatia. Their aim is to provide speculative fiction ebooks, primarily by Croatian authors, sharing those stories with the rest of the world. All of their ebooks are produced with love and by a small team of local professionals. They believe in diverse stories and high-quality speculative fiction for all. I'm your host for the evening, Paul Anthony Shortt. I'm an author with roots in horror, fantasy, and urban fantasy, and I'm the Access Advisor for Glasgow 2024. With me tonight are Vesna Kurilić, the CEO and owner of Shtriga Books, Igor Rendić, and Antonija Mežnarić.
Hello.
Hi.
So welcome, and thank you all for being here. So first up, what we'll have is a quick reading from Igor and Antonija. And then we'll have an interview session where I'll speak to our panelists about various topics related to folklore and how it differs from region to region, how it's adapted over time and been reinterpreted, and the importance it can have in day-to-day life. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so I would ask that if anyone does have any questions in the chat, to save that for that section so that we can make sure not to miss anyone. So first up, I am going to ask Antonija. You'll be reading from your collection of queer folk horror stories,
Yes.
Mistress of Geese.
Yes. I'm going to read a part from the first story in this book, Make a Toast to Spring.
Okay, take it away. I'm going to mute myself while you're doing that.
Okay, thank you. A bit of a warning, there will be some slight body horror and probably bad pronunciation, so sorry in advance. The world spun and spun, just a merry-go-round, a wheel of flame, of burning eyes. There was something in the woods, in the canyon, in the air she breathed in. The piercing melody started following her futile search. A search for what? Her mind couldn't really decide. In a moment, she would remember Borna, and it would be his name she called in the night, such a small two-syllable word consumed by the shrieking, vibrating music, echoing loudly all around her. A moment later, her ears would finally connect with her brain, and she would understand that the music meant someone else was there, so she should call for help. A shrill vibrato of a wind instrument only mocked her, its player out of her reach, somewhere beyond where the small circle of her artificial light fell. Yelena, she heard somewhere behind her, the familiarity of the voice so disturbingly strange, as if she'd heard it over the phone and couldn't recognize the speaker. But she knew who it was, and it made her only run in the opposite direction, her fear kicking in. Her heart knew something her brain still didn't comprehend. Someone was driving her oldest friend. She couldn't bear to see that walking puppet body, couldn't risk being caught by that thing parading as Tina. So she ran and ran while the music was crescendoing into a pitch so loud her eardrums were on the verge of shattering. Slipping on something wet, her arms met the muddy ground in a painful thud, catching her falling body in the last moment before her head could crack open on some rock. Her phone fell out of her hand, rolling out, the light flashing like a disco ball, showing glimpses of something, a kaleidoscope of things, something pinkish, crumpled, left there on the ground, changing with the wood, the roots, the trunks. The light finally settled on a lichen-covered huckberry tree. Not seeing it didn't mean it wasn't there. Completely aware that she'd seen something discarded on the ground, another piece of clothing, probably, Yelena stood up, her palms stinging, and took the phone back in her hand. She just hoped it wasn't Borna's briefs. It wasn't. She stood there, light on the ground, and her mind still couldn't comprehend what her eyes were seeing. The background soundtrack continued, the unknown player not getting tired in the slightest, the music nudging her to either move away quickly or take a better look at what she'd found. Crouching, she picked it up, the leathery material stoking her dread. As soon as she touched it, it unfurled. Raised in the air, it showed the whole length hidden in the crumpled bundle. A long tuft of curly hair fell from one leathery part, and that simple, recognizable piece made her jerk so hard she dropped the thing. Her heart beat louder than the eerie music as light fell on the shedded skin on the ground. She had it in her hands. She couldn't bear it, didn't want to see the empty space where meat, bones, muscle, and organs should be, so she ran away. Her eyes burned with tears, images flowing wild inside her mind. Borna running alone, shedding his clothes, everything he had on, not stopping even when he was naked and when there was only his skin to pull off. The light of Yelena's phone shone on the lonely patches on the ground, showing more she didn't want to see. Crimson chunks, dark wet lumps she didn't want to identify. She didn't want to see, and yet, even through blurry tears and patchy light, it appeared her brain could only focus on Borna's discarded body parts. It wasn't possible. She was hallucinating. This was just her mind playing tricks. How could somebody scoop up his liver in his arm to throw it away and then walk further to discard his beating heart? How could someone walk with their guts unfurling on the ground, leaving their body like breadcrumbs for friends to find? It wasn't possible. Her lungs burning in exhaustion, her body in a complete state of panic, repeating it was impossible as a mantra when she finally found the biggest piece of what was left of Borna. She stopped dead in her tracks. The weeping music wailed, her bones hurt from the sound or maybe the sight in front of her. Of course, there was no way for her to know that it had been Borna. It didn't have his hair, or his warm smiling lips, or the skin, in fact. The thing in front of her was just a skeleton with patches of meat still in place, pinkish red, eyeless, lipless, but not motionless. Bony fingers scratched over pieces of meat that still hung from him. The body was half lying, half reclining on the ground, air whistling through the holes in the bones. It clacked and twitched, but worst of all, it spoke. Yelena, Yelena. The air slipping over bones shaped the words, even with the complete lack of vocal cords, just a facsimile of a spoken sound. I need to get it off me. Please get it off me. This isn't me. I, she tried to answer, her tongue stuck to the root of her mouth. The skeleton was mostly absurd, an image from an old children's cartoon. She can imagine it dancing and singing to the great mouse's tune. The only thing that truly made her heart ache was the knowledge, buried deep under the chaos of thoughts. There was no fixing this. She couldn't glue the pieces back together. It was what it was.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's beautifully disturbing imagery. I love it.
I hated it. I edited it and I hated every sentence. I mean, it's awesome.
Oh yeah, no, that's fantastic stuff. That is excellent. So that was from the first book in Mischief Geese, which I believe is also called Mischief Geese. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Cool. I do have some things to ask about that, but I'll save that for later on. Next up is Igor, reading from his new book, A Town Called River, which I believe is due out in November.
Igor, you're muted.
So my editors and publishers tell me.
Yeah, we do. Mid-November, if the stars align.
Yeah.
Excellent.
11/11, so you don't have to worry which is the month and which is the day.
It's hard when you're publishing for the Croatian audience and the broader audience.
Absolutely. And now, whereas Antonia's work is more horror focused, yours is urban fantasy.
Yeah, mine is urban fantasy. The excerpt I will be reading is from the first third of the novel. So the only setup I need to give you is that the main character, Paul, has returned to Croatia because his grandmother has died. And he discovers that she had magical powers that upon her death, he inherited. So investigating what was actually going on with her, because she had this entire secret life, this is what he's told about her own, about his grandmother's childhood. So this is a friend of Paul's telling him the tale of how his grandma actually discovered her own powers.
Cool, sounds good. Take it away. And again, I'm going to mute myself while you read this.
Grandma Lena had discovered our family's, I guess, legacy is as good a word as any, when she was still just a girl. She'd had dreams, very vivid and very disturbing, for a full month prior to waking up one morning in a potato patch behind her parents' house, stark naked and with dirt under her fingernails as if she'd been digging barehanded. The dreams had been of someone stalking the people of her village, always behind a wall, under a window, peering through a crack in the door. And in the dreams, she was the only one who could see that someone, although never in full. Just eyes in the darkness above the ceiling beams, watching a family at dinner, a hand resting on the windowsill above the bed someone was sleeping in. A grin, sly and cruel, the teeth numerous and sharp. Grandma Lena had managed to get back into the house that morning without anyone noticing, through her bedroom window, the one her late mother had always made sure was closed before letting her daughter go to sleep. She'd washed as best she could, got dressed, and prayed she'd find her nightgown before her stepmother discovered it was missing. She did find it later that day, in the woods not far from their farm. It wasn't torn and it wasn't very dirty, but there was blood on it. Lena had washed the nightgown the best she could, put it in the attic to dry, and counted herself unbelievably lucky her stepmother didn't discover it. As to how she'd found the nightgown in the first place, it had been her turn to take the cows out to pasture, and she'd used the opportunity to clear her head, which was full of soft buzzing and vague feelings she couldn't grasp no matter how hard she tried. The walk in the sun, under clear blue skies, in the middle of spring did her good, definitely. She'd felt reinvigorated, walking barefoot in the grass. And then, mid-step, she remembered running under the full light of the moon, barefoot and still in her nightgown. In that memory, she wasn't being chased. She was running towards the woods under the craggy hill that dominated the view from her bedroom window. The woods she was now no more than a short walk away from. Leaving the cows to their grazing, but still keeping an eye on them, my grandma walked, slowly and full of apprehension. Then, at the very edge of the woods, she stopped and realized her apprehension had somehow turned into a strange excitement, as if she were coming back to a place where something amazing had happened. And she remembered what? Waking from a dream, a fever dream, sweaty and cold and hot and aching all over, as if her skin were too tight for her flesh and bones. Looking through the window slats, seeing the woods and the hill, pitch black and dark gray, bathed in blindingly white moonlight. And then realizing she could tell blades of grass apart under her window and make out individual leaves on the oak next to the water trough. She could hear her father and stepmother softly breathing in the sleep, and what was probably a mouse skittering across the attic floor. There'd been a soft whoosh, and she saw something move in the oak's high branches. An owl had just landed there, its eyes enormous and deep as the bird looked straight at Lena. None of that should have been possible for her to see, to hear, not even in full daylight. She must have still been asleep, dreaming. She fully expected to be once again transported into one of the houses in the village to see him. Something told her it was a him, not an it, observing people sleep or work, always near, menacing, stalking, praying. The owl hooted. Lena flinched, felt pain in her fingertip from a splinter from the window. She was awake. And the owl was there, in the dark under the thick cover of leaves, yet she could see it clearly when she shouldn't have been able to. Lena felt as if all the air in her bedroom had simply vanished. She opened the window and then sat on the sill and jumped that meter or so down. The grass was soft and inviting under her bare feet. The moonlight seemed to flow across her like skin, The moonlight seemed to flow across her skin like oil on water. The owl hooted again, spread its wings, and took silent flight. Lena ran after it, towards the woods. She'd realized it was ridiculous and dangerous only when she was already deep among the trees. The owl was gliding smoothly between the gangly trees before it suddenly perched on a tall tree's branch, high over a small campfire. There was a man there, very surprised to see Lena. She remembered that clearly, the look of shock on his face as she stepped into the flickering light. He'd been sitting on a large stone, gazing deep into the fire. He rose to his feet then, slowly, regally. He was tall, slim but muscled. Firelight danced over his pale skin, giving it a bronze sheen as he gently moved towards Lena, hands outstretched as if to say, "Don't be afraid." There were, Lena noticed then, horns on his head. No, not horns. Antlers, short and thin, encircling his head like a crown. They spoke, even though Lena didn't know how, because she was certain he didn't know her language, and she certainly couldn't speak any other. But talk they did. He'd asked who she was and what she was doing there. She just shot the questions back at him. He told her a girl had no business being in the woods at night, alone. She'd asked what business men with antlers had on her father's property. And then the owl hooted and the man's eyes went wide. He asked her if she'd had bad dreams. Lena had said yes. She'd been having them for weeks now. He asked if, in those dreams, she ever saw the face of the man stalking the villagers. She said no, that every time it seemed to her she would finally see it, she woke up, terror twisting her insides. The antlered man asked her if she knew what she was, to which my grandma, possibly for the first time in her life, had no smart-ass response. "Am I not?" she started asking, but he raised his hand gently. "I am not interested in what you are not," he said, in a language Lena knew she couldn't speak even as she conversed with the man. "Tell me what you are." "I feel something inside me," Lena said finally, after a long silence interrupted only by the crackling of fire and sparks flying through the night air. "I felt it for some time, but I cannot say what." The antlered man did not respond, but his eyes, dark with flames reflecting amber in them, locked with hers. "I am Lena," my grandma said finally, "not a particularly obedient daughter to my father, a good friend to the few people I care about." She took a deep breath, finally about to give, for the first time, voice to what she'd been keeping inside for more than a year at that point. "I am a girl who cares more for carving wood than milking the cows. I am a girl who would rather wear trousers and ride a horse than wear skirts and feed the chickens." A silence that seemed to last an eternity. "And I am a girl who has been having dreams of a man, a terrible man, a man moving in the shadows just behind your back, always there, always watching, never seen. A man stalking the village, my people. A man who is a threat, a monster, a demon. I am a girl who would stop him." So we're going to stop there because spoilers.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much for that. So I'm just going to ask our two authors here a couple of questions about their specific books, and then I'm going to move on to a general discussion about Shtriga and folklore. So again, starting with Antonia. So what can you tell us about the inspiration for the tales that you've put together in this collection?
Well, there are various inspiration. These stories were created in a span of a year, I think, year and a half. But most of it is inspired bit by Croatian folklore, bits by some old Croatian tales, and various things like stories I heard happening in real life. For example, I always tell the story,
The kitten story.
the kitten story. Yeah, one of the stories, The Rock at the Bottom, was actually inspired when I was on the island called Korčula. And we were rowing from one of the villages to the very small uninhabited island very near. So you can row there. You have nothing there. It's just rock and some shrubbery. So people from that village on Korčula used it to dump unwanted kittens on the island. So they will get rid of them in that way. And Vesna actually told me that story. So while we were rowing and she was telling me this really sad and depressing tale, I was like, what if they had some other motives to do something like that? And since I started to get in folk horror, it of course took in more ritual sacrifice for some unknown powers turn, and that's the way that particular story came to be. But like I said, there are actually 5 stories here. And there are longer stories, but shorter than novellas, so novelettes. And there are really a lot of inspiration behind them, but mostly you can trace it back to my love for folk tales, specifically Croatian folk.
Okay. Now I noted from the information I've been given and what I've found on the likes of Goodreads, etc., is, as I said, it's specifically a collection of queer folk story.
Yes.
Now that's interesting to me because where I am in Ireland, a lot of our folklore loses its LGBTQ elements, which and the same over in Britain as well, and a lot of other places. And it's probably safe to put a lot of that blame onto Christian persecution of same-sex relationships, because if you look pre-Christian into non-Christian, whether it's Greek and Roman or Norse storytelling, there are loving same-sex relationships between men, between women, and beings that can change their gender at will. And do you bring any of those themes into your work? And if so, can you talk a little about it?
So I was just reminded when you started talking about, there is actually a legend, Croatian legend about, if you want to change your sex, so if a woman wants to become a man, she needs to go under the rainbow and throw her hat toward the sky, and voila, a man. And vice versa.
I love that.
Yeah, it's very
brilliant.
There's actually like a story which is required reading in Croatian elementary schools.
Yeah,
based on the legend.
Based on the legend, but it's of course very tragic story. It needs a context of historical time to be understood, though it's very sympathetic towards a girl who wants to become a boy. So yeah, it's very, trans-affirming story, it's totally like, okay, you have a means to achieve what you want. So yeah, definitely, I think there was more free of approach, but the reason, why I'm writing queer stories mostly is because I am a queer woman. So and of course, folk horror is always interesting to me because of its themes of isolation and loneliness, and oppressive societies who are hell-bent on the old ways, and it's all connected to who has power and who has not. And I always thought that this kind of story are very like, it's perfect for, you know, queer reimagining, and most of the folklore I see is very, you know, heteronormative. So I write from this particular perspective, and not so much in the maybe theoretical perspective.
I was hoping you'd actually draw that comparison, because it's one thing I saw when I was reading through everything was there is that very clear, like you say yourself, the connection. It's like the isolation and loneliness is part of the LGBTQ experience for so many people. So it's natural to find a sense of belonging in these kinds of stories, I think.
Thanks.
Okay, Igor. So, so I liked what I love the idea in Tango River that your protagonist inherits his power, not only from a woman but from a maternal figure. So it's his grandmother. It struck me that in folklore we often deal with inheritance and inherited curses, particularly. Now, was this something in your mind as you wrote this? Because it also feeds into another thing I want to get onto, which is the idea of blending the modern and traditional and bringing folklore to the present day.
Well, there wasn't anything particular, like a specific thing that inspired me. It's just that inherited powers or curses, as you mentioned, so at least so very common in the fiction that I've read and watched and stuff like that. It was just, well, yeah, of course he inherited powers, because at the end, what I also really liked about him inheriting his powers is that he doesn't only inherit her powers, he inherits her basically job, because she's so his grandmother is a krstnik, which is something that is quite at least in some ways specific to Slavic mythology. But to draw a comparison with something that most people would probably know, is that krstniks are basically something like witchers. Andrei Sapkowski's and Netflix TV show and the CD Projekt Red games. So witchers are basically grew out of a krstnik, which is a human being that has supernatural powers and uses them to fight other monsters, to protect, usually to protect his or her own village.
Yeah.
The great thing about krstniks is actually that basically every village has their own idea of what a krstnik is. So I didn't have to be a slave to any particular like mythological or a part of folklore, because literally nobody can tell me no. They can. There's literally like three things that every bit of folklore in Croatia, let alone in wider Slavic region, agrees upon, and it's that they're born with their powers, and that they fight other monsters. Usually, that they fight these like polar opposites of theirs, which are called Shtriguns, which are something between a warlock and a vampire, but not either thing, because a lot of folklore that we know today from various pieces of fiction is actually modified and twisted versions of what it really was like in old folklore. So the modern idea of a vampire doesn't really have a lot to do with the traditional idea of a vampire, which is something that Antonija could definitely talk about also. But my idea was that it was these two things, and the third is that they usually they can also enter people's dreams, and that was it. So it was like this amazing carte blanche that I can do, and basically not carte blanche, tabula rasa, blank slate, that I can do anything basically with it. So I decided, yeah, sure, he inherits his powers, and he inherits her job, and he inherits all her problems, because she'd been doing this for decades. So there's a lot of baggage, let's just say, and one of the things I really wanted to tackle in this novel, in the first novel, was exactly how you would handle literally not just it's not that he's just thrown into the deep end of the pool, because 3 days before the novel starts, he had no idea that the supernatural even exists. So he's not just thrown into the deep end of the pool, he has actually his pockets stuffed with stones, just to, you know.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. What struck me from the excerpt actually was the line, "Tell me what you are," which I find very, very powerful, because a lot of folklore deals with knowing yourself and being true to your own nature. And it's often a character's nature that determines their fate more so than their choices. We see, you know, two off the top of my head that are, I don't know if they're more Western or Eastern, but you've got Little Red Riding Hood and you've got Goldilocks, and their entire stories are about the fact that they are inquisitive, very naive, and that gets them into peril and becomes the moral of the story. Whereas they don't really make choices so much as their choices are forced upon them by who they are.
I mean, yeah, I mean, but basically everything that happens to Goldilocks is because she's a disobedient child that runs away from home.
Yes, exactly. Whereas I find that modern storytelling leans towards defying fate.
Yeah.
The idea that you can beat your nature, you can beat what storyteller has set out for you, basically. Do you find that when you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of permeates at least Western fiction. You know, destiny versus us fighting against it versus us actually making, you know, our own destiny. You know, like destiny wants to push us this way, we're gonna go this way, but finally you find us the middle road in some way, one or another. Yeah, I do think that now that I think about it, we're kind of a little bit obsessed with destiny, really.
We are.
I think we've basically all the old stories were, I think, for a large part, what you said. Things that happen to you, not that you choose. So maybe as a civilization, we've decided to push it the other way. So I'm making my own choice. But what I always find most interesting are those stories, you know, novels, film, TV shows, comics, whatever, where it's like the middle road, where, like I said, destiny with capital D is trying to force itself on the protagonist, and then they kind of find a way that they can incorporate it, but, you know, do their own thing as well. I think that's the more interesting thing than just, you know, going full polar opposite. And in the end, I think it makes for better storytelling.
Yeah, very true. Now, one of the things Vesna mentioned to me when we were prepping for this evening was that Igor and Antonia, both of you take inspiration from the same region. But what you've managed to do is spin this each into completely different areas. For example, like Antonia, you've gone into horror, and Igor, you've gone into urban fantasy. And now I have this personal theory that eventually, if you keep the same characters and story going, horror evolves eventually into urban fantasy, because horror is defined, I think, by the absence of power.
Yeah.
Whereas urban fantasy is typically about the scared character coming into power and using that power against what oppresses them. So can you both speak to that a bit about, you know, so I didn't get a chance to look up the pronunciation, but the region is Rijeka? Rijeka. Sorry. I apologize.
No, that's
Rijeka.
Okay. Actually, out of the three of us, I think it's our hometown. Yeah. But Igor hails from a region like right next to Rijeka. I basically
live in the suburbs.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's discussion in his book if where he lives is the suburbs of Rijeka or if it's going to become the suburb of Rijeka.
But in like 20 years, probably, because it's like I live on the outskirts, but I'm so close. Like my bus connections are more frequent than some city lines. So come on.
So when we're talking about inspiration from Croatian folklore and in Igor's novel, yes, and Krsnik, we are mostly talking about Istrian region. Istra is near Rijeka. We are split with Učka mountain, and most of the stories about Krsnik and Shtriga actually come from Istria.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not sure if Rijeka had its own stories about Krsnik.
Well, now it does. Now it's like mid-November.
That's the only thing better than taking inspiration from stories is making new ones.
Yeah.
Excellent. Which actually brings me interesting on to just your company in general. So you're a very new publishing house. I believe you started in 2020.
Yes. Yep.
Which is, that's a brave time to start a business. So my hat's off to you.
One of the companies which was a great inspiration, Hangar 7 or Hangar 7 from Zagreb. Also, I think they started in 2011, which was when the recession was really heavy in Croatia. And I always read stories, about companies that started in the Great Depression, etc. But I never imagined we would actually do it. Something like it. I never wanted to get the opportunity to start.
Well, if you want to talk about going from horror into power, that's certainly a. And it's true that in times of uncertainty, horror thrives. People are drawn to it.
Yeah, I mean, horror really had some sort of a renaissance in book just recently. I think last year it had a big boom.
And not just horror, but specifically either inspired or direct retellings of folk tales.
Really?
I don't know if it's been okay. I'm judging by the big publishers.
Of course.
Antonija and Vesna can speak more about, because they follow the indie scene more. But Tor especially has been making a really big push. All these novels that are basically retellings of various more or less known folk tales. They're also slant slightly towards like Slavic, because I think that's kind of still an untapped region. Because no, because I mean, everybody at this point, I think everybody knows what a Valkyrie is, or what a leprechaun looks like, but not a lot of people know stuff from Eastern folklore. So that's this, like I said, is untapped, semi-untapped, because up until recently you had like Catherine Valente, who did the Koshi the Deathless, and a couple of other big name authors that did stuff inspired by Catherine Arden, who did the trilogy, The Girl in the Tower, stuff like that. But yeah.
Oh, we have a question from chat from Nicole.
Good God.
Who asks, hi Nicole, within folklore, how are powers stolen? And once stolen, is there a way to regain them as detailed in myth? That's a really good question.
Ooh. Oh.
I need to remember. There are ways, actually. One of my favorite folk tales, it's not Croatian, it's I think originally Serbian, but it's South Slavic folk tale called Bashtelic. And it has this whole plot revolving around this super powerful guy who is basically untouchable, like Superman. You can't break his skin or anything like that. And he has wings. He flies, which you learn later in the story. Unexpectedly.
Oh, by the way, he has wings.
That's kind of one of those. I believe they're technically called ass pull moments, where it's like, oh, he can fly.
he's completely described as a normal person, and then just
his wings, something.
And then his wings showed up. I'm like, what wings? Okay, never mind. So he's winged, and he flies, and he's unbreakable. And he's an antagonist in that story, and our hero, the prince, finds him while he was in dungeon or captured by the one king. And even though he had all of that power, he was completely powerless thanks to the iron chainmail that was covered him whole from head to toes, and he could basically do nothing. He just lived in that closed room. And of course, our hero makes a mistake because the guy asks him for a little bit of water, and he just sees this pathetic guy in chains and thinks, okay, of course, why not? And he gives him water, and in the moment that he takes a bit of water, the chains just drop out from him, and he regains his powers. So yeah, there are ways to lose your powers and ways to gain them back, and in the usual folk ways, there's no way really the cause and effect to understand from our modern standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, I guess, I mean, I know iron is usually used in folk tales, I think, with fairies.
Yeah.
So there are ways, you know, and things that are continuously used in the stories that can...
Salt.
Yeah.
Salt usually.
Yeah. But when you are reading the story, you really can't connect this. You really don't know what will happen, like wings, for example. And I think South Slavic stories really had that a lot of a plot twist with people and creatures that usually don't have wings or can fly, suddenly fly. Other story that used that had flying horses. And of course, you didn't know they were flying horses until the hero, the moment that hero needed to fly somewhere, the horses he saw in the stable had wings. And
it's I think it's interesting. In a lot of, you get to a point where in older mythology and folklore, the hero regains their powers through either divine intervention of some kind or through outwitting their enemies. Whereas when you get into modern storytelling, superheroes in particular, which are essentially our modern mythology, it's more a case of you get your heroes back when you perform an act of sacrifice, self-sacrifice specifically. Thor, for example.
Yeah, I was literally thinking about that scene from Thor when it's like, oh, now he's worthy, and he gets the hammer back.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing I remembered regarding the question of powers and taking of power was like the Selkie stories. You can
right.
But it's not power, it's freedom. You get to take other people's freedom by stealing something or hiding something from them.
And in Croatia, we have something similar to Selkies. It's called Božja vučica, or
God's she-wolf.
God's she-wolf or divine she-wolf. And it's basically like Selkie, it's a wolf sent from the god. That's why it's God's she-wolf. And she can slip off her wolf pelt and become a woman. And if a shepherd sees her, he can and steals her wolf skin, then she needs to marry him. Of course, it's always like that. If she finds her pelt back, she can put it back on, become a wolf, and run away from him. But he has a way to gain her back. He just needs to find a wolf shepherd who shepherds the wolves, and wolves are listening to him. And if he recognizes from the wolf his wife, he can claim her back. I hate that story, but I love the concept of God's she-wolves, and that's why I actually have a story in this collection.
Ireland's got its own very different werewolves. They're actually they help people. Irish werewolves do. They I won't go into that because we're talking about Slavic and Croatian mythology here. So I'm going to go to a point I made, like reviewing. I love the Shtriga website, by the way, Vesna, where you comment about how there's two kinds of Shtriga.
Yes.
There's the one is a very creepy and dangerous animal that crawls through the undergrowth. The other is a very creepy and very dangerous creature from Slavic mythology. You adore one and frantically run away from the other, and you say you choose which. I love that. It reminds me that you find a lot of duality in folklore, where meanings can be reversed or corrupted, not just within the story, but also the message the story is telling. Similar to how the image of in Western Europe, the image of the alewife, women who would brew, who would handle brewing. Alewife was a more modern term put onto women who brewed, basically, because women originated brewing and controlled it for centuries. It was one of the few ways a woman could have a profession for a very long time. And that image of the alewife, women who lived alone out in the countryside, pointed hats and everything, was eventually corrupted into the modern idea of a witch. When we wanted someone to blame for things and demonize, because we couldn't have women being independent, could we? How dare they?
And she lives alone. Beyond the city gates or the village.
Exactly, yeah, beyond the safe confines of the town. So what can you tell us about the Shtriga, and how the folklore specifically of the Shtriga, because I'm obviously that matters to you because you took your company's name from it. So I'm wondering, how has the folklore of the Shtriga evolved, and what makes a Shtriga so distinct from other witches, not just within, Slavic myth, but also around the world?
So there are different versions of Shtriga, since there are a lot of Slavic countries. So when we talk about Shtriga, we're talking about, Croatian version, because that's something that I can talk about, but I'm sure that Polish authors would have a different sort of spin of it on it. And more specifically, like I mentioned earlier, when we are talking about Shtrigas, we are talking about mostly Istrian stories, where they're originated, but like I think Igor mentioned, every village has its own spin, so it's all very, very fun. But mostly she's like a woman who's a shapeshifter, defined through their antagonistic relationship with the good Krsnik, who fights for the good, and mostly male, and Shtrigas mostly are like evil. Evil because they are connected to diseases. So the idea is, that they can bring disease to their neighbors and such, and
their cows,
stuff like that.
The usual.
Yeah, they're connected to disease, while Krsnik is connected to the healing. And Shtriga can shapeshift also, pretty much into any animal, but the most popular are ox, dog, fly, mouse, cat, and fly and mouse, again, diseases.
Yeah.
But that are just some of the versions, and mostly, like Igor mentioned, for Krsnik, it's more up to your interpretation of things and for your creativity and imagination. And I think a lot of our authors, when they write about Shtrigas and Krsnik, are really giving them something more to do, not just, bring cold to your neighbor. Yeah, but Igor, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, because you just reminded me, the shape-shifting bit is actually quite interesting. It permeates a lot of Slavic mythology, a lot of different entities from Slavic mythology can actually shapeshift, which isn't something, because in what we usually mean when we say Western folklore mythology, you got a couple of shapeshifters, but usually it's like vampires and werewolves.
Yeah.
Witches, for the most part, aren't really known to shapeshift unless you mean in the sense of like looking like a younger version of themselves to trick somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like what Antonija said, Shtrigas, Kersniks as well. That's one of the things that they shifting into dogs and wolves. Usually also ox. Although the thing with speaking of duality, Kersniks, when they shift into animals, they're usually white animals. Shtrigas, when they shift into animals, they're usually black animals. So you can like spot them a mile away, stuff like that.
Unless it's nighttime.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that's very interesting though, because I was wondering about the the difference between more Eastern witches essentially and more Western idea witches. And as you said yourself, Igor, in Western folklore and tales, witches don't shapeshift. They could become they could look like another person, but it's an illusion. They haven't actually changed form. Whereas from what you're telling me about, in Eastern ones, shapeshifting is a much more prominent thing. These witches seem more primordial and powerful. They almost are Shtriga and other similar witch type creatures even human, or they like Western witches, which are just they've made pacts with the devil or demons or whatever he spells.
I think Shtrigas are born that way, right, Antonija?
Yeah, they're born usually in with placenta. Yeah,
the cow.
The cow, yeah,
the bird cow, yeah.
Placenta on their face.
I thought that was a Kersnik thing.
Both, yeah.
Yeah, it's both. So they are born like that, and there are even some folk tales about Shtrigas that are like more sympathetic in a way, like, yeah, sure, her neighbor has a cold because of her, but it's not her fault. She was born like that. She can't do anything about it.
One of those strangely progressive folk tales.
Mostly it's really like a bad thing to be. And actually I just remembered my colleague recently when we were talking about someone, and there was some other woman that really irritated her. She was really, really angry at her, and she really just said in Croatian, like, that's Shtriga. So in these regions, Shtriga is also used as an euphemism for bitch.
Actually, a great word in English, harridan. When somebody says for a woman she's a harridan, that's basically what they mean when they say Shtriga. It's kind of the same character.
Yeah, I get you. Okay, actually, funny you should mention the word character, because I was also curious about. So every type of story, every genre has its stock characters and themes that come up again. So what are the stock characters and themes of Balkan and Slavic folk tales, and how do they compare, in your experience, to more Western ones?
The third son or the youngest son? Always.
So not the firstborn, like a lot of.
No. Is that thing? Yeah, where the firstborn usually inherits the house and the money. The secondborn,
or whatever.
Yeah, or the army, or becomes a priest.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This one has nothing.
The third one, like
the sympathetic one, the kid of the family.
So he inherits the adventure.
Yeah, basically, because he doesn't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of stories when the first two are either incompetent or too arrogant, and they can team up against the third one, like they're on some sort of adventure because they need to do something, find something, whatever, and something dangerous needs to be done. So they just push the third one to do the thing, and when he helps them to gain money or some other riches, they cut him off and leave him for dead. So
the comebacks.
That's really interesting, because in the end, like, there is often a thing of the third brother in some more, like Three Little Pigs and the Billy Goat's Gruff.
Yeah.
But in that order, it goes youngest to oldest, usually. Like it's the eldest Gruff who can beat the troll under the bridge.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's
the third one who's the best one. Like they're all sleeping on the lake, and the first night the first brother is keeping a watch, and dragon with one head shows up and he needs to kill it. The second night the second one has a watch, and then the two-headed dragon comes up and he needs to kill it. And the third night, of course, is the third one, and the fact that he needed to kill the three-headed dragon shows that he's the best of the group.
So I know it's not like exactly folk, but the old mother or the old woman, but I keep mixing the relatively recent, I mean, I think it's like 100 or 120 years old, the Tales of Long Ago by Ivana Brlić-Mežuranić. She wrote like modern folk tales in the beginning of the 20th century, and she was very big on the poor old woman or old mother who needs help. Yeah, so I think
there's house spirits. Yeah, pretty much benevolent and malevolent. Although even when they're malevolent, they're not malevolent in the sense of horror movies today. They're like making mischief, curdling milk, not killing grandma. And
And Ashdaya, we have a lot of Ashdaya in.
Basically dragons.
Oh, cool.
They're different kind.
Yeah.
It's like a token title for all sorts of monsters, mostly dragons.
Mostly dragons, those that sleep in the lakes, and they can also have similar to these spirits be antagonists, so something that hero needs to defeat, or they can actually help out and be the helper for him to gain something.
Okay. Now, you mentioned several times, Antonia, about what we're calling Slavic mythology tonight is actually Eastern Slavic mythology primarily. So what do you feel about how that's come to the forefront as the identity of Slavic mythology and fantasy? About, and this is of course open to everyone. And why doesn't, say, for example, South Slavic or come into play as much?
I don't know. I think, I mean, the most popular books right now are based either on Polish or on Russian Slavic folk. And I think it's mostly because, well, everyone went, I think, connects the word Slavic with Russia.
Well, because they're the biggest Slavic country, so
I think Poland is probably the second biggest, or
I mean, it's the same way, like when you talk about Asian science fiction and fantasy, you'll usually talk about China, simply because they're the biggest.
So Russia is the biggest and it's the most famous one, or infamous. No. So it's kind of and smaller, much, and we were
all of us, not all Croatia, like all the Slavic,
South Slavic. I don't know, and I think it comes from that. We're not as well known.
And we haven't had many books in English published based on Slavic, on South Slavic mythology, which is one of the many reasons we are doing this whole.
Because look, we're a small country and a small language. So unless you can find a translator or do the translation yourself, people are not gonna know about your Croatian fantasy-inspired novel.
There's another thing which gets mentioned often in Croatia, that Serbia, which is bigger, has like a very vivacious like publishing scene for fantasy also, but they don't write in English either. So
although, I mean, honestly, just like when you said, Poland has a huge domestic scene. They have authors that are huge in Poland that you've never heard of. I mean, you've heard of Sapkowski because of The Witcher, because of the games. But they actually made the games because the novels were so popular in Poland that CD Projekt Red actually thought maybe we can sell this to the wider market. Whereas I think the thing with Russians is there's a lot of Russians in the US. especially including in the film industry. So I think there was kind of this push maybe to draw some Russian, to infuse some Russian folklore. And I think those films like Night Watch and Day Watch kind of helped.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were huge hits in Russia. Then they became moderate hits in the US. But they kind of opened doors because I think after the first film came out, they started translating the novels. So now you have stuff like the Night Watch, the Day Watch. You got stuff like Metro 2033, which is science fiction, but it's Russian. So I think that's also a big part, that you need to be noticed on your own in order to become popular, which is in the end why Vesna and Antonija are doing this.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to come to Croatia and ask us, oh, you guys have any fantasy novels or science fiction novels for us? No, we need to push ourselves out there, and then somebody might notice.
And we hope somebody will notice. Well, you notice.
We will be persistent.
We've got a good audience here tonight. We've got some more questions in the chat we're going to get to. But I also wanted to ask, how did you find it? I mean, I mentioned before how I think it was a very brave choice to start off your company mid-pandemic. What it's been like launching and running in a pandemic, and are there any new projects that you, either as individuals or as a house together, have on the horizon? Are they being affected by reopening?
Well, I think we had like a smaller start locally, because there were no in-person like book signings and readings and book presentations, which are a thing in Croatia, even though it's not as the audiences are never big. We're used to it, but
here.
Yeah, you know what it's like.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Not necessarily, because we have focused on ebooks. Maybe, I'm not sure if that was even impacted by the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, we have problems with the fact that we are a small company for the small country, and we need to break into break out into the big markets, and that I think that this particular troubles would still be the same, even if it wasn't a pandemic.
For the pandemic. But we're, Antonija follows like a lot of bigger publishers online, and we all heard the paper shortage and printing issues, which the biggest houses, particularly American, have right now, and the projected shortages of paper, and we have no idea whether that's going to affect like our copies. We use print on demand. I think they're printed in Poland and or Italy mostly, our books, but we have no idea what's going to happen, and we'll see. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go into some of the Q&As from the chat here. Mark says,
Hi, Mark.
Greetings from a Scottish person watching from Australia. So, oh my God, what time is it where you are?
Yeah, like literally.
Fair play, my man. He was wondering, which folklore creature do you all personally find the most scary? I'll start with Igor on this one.
Ooh,
So hard.
good guy. You know what? Mora, which is Mora, which is basically the basis for the creature nightmare, because nightmare comes from the word nightmare comes from Mora. In Croatian, nightmare is literally noćna mora, which literally means nightmare, and it's like this dark entity that just comes into your room and tortures you while you're asleep. I think it's most scariest to me, because when I was a kid, I wasn't scared of the dark like I needed, psychiatrists, but I was like, you could always see something in the dark moving. And fortunately for me, I found out about Moras when I was like in college, so that was good, because if I was a kid, I would have been convinced there was something in the corner waiting for me to fall asleep, just to start digging its claws into me. But yeah, Mora definitely.
Yeah,
I think mostly because when you're mostly Mora because it comes for you when you're asleep, so you literally can't see it coming.
So
That's not yeah.
yeah, it's the same for.
I wanted to say Mora also, and actually
Wow.
a novella for about Mora.
This wasn't planned. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't making a setup for Antonija.
I was surprised when Igor said Mora because I was thinking like
scary. It is.
You're helpless when it comes,
and it suffocates you while you're dreaming, and it can come like a snake or a horse, and
you don't know what you don't necessarily know what it is. You don't know it's supernatural.
Though I have a better answer actually, because I was thinking, oh my God, he said Mora, I need to say something else now, and I think my answer would be people.
Well, that just trumps everything, doesn't it?
I mean, there are a lot of scary monsters and creatures in the dark, but the scariest things, I think, are always to me connected with what one human being can do to another human.
Stephen King made a career out of that. So
also the X-Files episode, I think it was called Home. Was it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
One of those when you think there's something supernatural. No, it's just people.
A couple of supernatural episodes like that too.
Yeah, no. Now I think about it, yeah, there's an episode of Supernatural. You think it's actually something supernatural. It's just like crazy hillbillies.
Crazy hillbillies, and then there's the kids who are kept in the walls.
Yeah, there's an episode.
You think are ghosts, but they're not.
There was an episode of Torchwood that also wasn't anything supernatural or anything alien. It was just serial killers. So,
I think that gets from a storytelling point of view, that gets scary because when you learn about monsters, there's always rules for monsters.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a way to beat a monster. It's got limits on what it can do. And then when you apply those to something you think is a monster and it doesn't work, regardless of whether it's human or not, that's terrifying. I'm actually going to go on a slight tangent. I'm reminded of the movie Hellraiser 3. That was the first movie I ever saw where hiding in a church did nothing for you. Because he just blows the doors open and he walks in and the windows burst inwards. It's a great scene. Really is. But anyway, back to folklore.
That or when, sorry, but actually I can't remember a specific example, but anytime in a horror where it's daylight, but something is still happening, because you're usually taught in horror films, you know, when daybreak comes, oh, they're safe. And no, why? Daylight horror, it's not as frequent. It doesn't appear as frequently, but I really love it when it happens because it's like nobody's safe.
It's harder to get right, I think.
Yeah.
So if someone can pull that off, fair play to them. Damien asks, what are your favorite grim dark folklore books? That's a tough one. Because whenever I read a folklore book, they all tend to blend together. I can remember where I read any given thing.
I'm going to take get free out of jail. Dark. I'm sorry. Don't read anything dark. If it's not like
grim. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what it means when it says folklore, like inspired by or directly dealing with. Because
if you can pop a Q&A in there really quick while we're discussing this, do you mean inspired by, because grimdark suggests fiction? That's a particular style of fiction.
Yeah, like Joe Abercrombie usually comes first thing that comes to people's minds when you say grimdark. So,
but folklore would tend to be stuff that's not necessarily written as a novel or a short story novella. It's tales passed down, and they're all pretty grimdark when you get right down to them.
Most of them.
I really wanted to say
the original DOG, not the grim version, but the earlier of one of
Charles Perrault, the French guy's version of the grim fairy tales. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, you don't. If you want really grimdark folklore, you need to read like the original versions of Little Red Riding Hood for first.
Oh,
Because
good God,
it's yes, because Little Red Riding Hood is a cautionary tale
All of them.
about talking to strangers in woods.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna keep this PG, but let's just say that her hood is originally white, and it becomes red because of something that happens. So,
Yeah.
Italian, I think it's Cinderella, is a pretty necrophiliac story.
Oh, yeah. That
is the Italian one where they cut off their heels to fit them in the shoe?
No, I'm sorry. Snow White.
you see,
Italian Snow
Snow
White.
White.
I wanted to say
Oh, yeah.
she drops into a coma. So you have the Disney version that just
Which
glass
reminds.
coffin, and the prince comes and kisses her.
And now you reminded me.
But the Italian version has the guy just stumbling on her comatose body, taking her home, and then like having her raise with that body and keeping her clean and always brushing her hair and stuff like that. And when he goes on some kind of trip, and he says to his mother, and now you need to take care of her.
So
Well,
this
I'm
basically
out of the
all
village.
sounds like an episode of Criminal Minds or something.
Yeah.
Definitely. And and the woman, like any logical woman would do, simply buries her because she thinks she's dead. And of course, the mother is later punished for her deed, for burying a body, not brushing her hair, and I don't know what she had needed to do to it. So yeah, it's always interesting to me when I hear people talking about, writing fairy tale retellings, but dark, because fairy tales originally
Are dark.
were pretty dark and hardcore.
I actually have an answer. I just remembered. It's a short story by Neil Gaiman. It's called Snow Glass Apples,
Yes.
and it's
Oh,
Snow
yeah.
White, but it's grimdark. And I'm not going to go into spoilers because I really like. If Damon hasn't read it, Damon should definitely read it because that's.
I mean, has clarified. I think we actually I think we really got the answer right, because it was a folklore story that is close to what we would consider grimdark.
Oh, yeah. No,
so I think we have basically got
Snow Glass Apples, absolutely. Snow Glass Apples. Yeah.
Excellent. We've got a bit more from Nicole again. First of all, asked if you can spell the word for she-wolf.
The Božja vučica.
Yeah.
Can you spell some in chat or?
Can I just pop in?
Yeah, type it into the chat, and I'll paste it. I can type the answer in there.
Okay, so I'm gonna go caps lock for you. So this is the Croatian version. This is the.
Oh wow.
There's gonna be a letter with a squiggle above it. Don't be afraid.
I'm gonna give you both here, Nicole. So
The Božja means literally gods.
Okay, it's not actually letting me copy, so I'm gonna have to give the phonetic. I'm very sorry.
No, it's fine.
And vučica means literally she-wolf.
Yeah.
Wolf is vuk, and vučica is she-wolf.
So there it is. And Nicole then has a sort of, I think it's two questions, but they're basically the same thing. I'm aware we only have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to hurry through these. Don't know if you can hear my dog scratching at the door in the back behind my background.
Oh, it's yours. I thought it was theirs.
No, it's my dog. Sorry. Would the Italian Shtriga resemble the Eastern European witch or Western witch? And this is very related, but is there a mythological distinction between a natural born witch or Shtriga or a human gifted with the ability to do magic or healing but calls themselves a witch or magician?
Okay, I see what she's asking. The problem here is that there's witches and Shtrigas and Strigas as presented in fiction, and there's all that stuff that's presented in mythology and folklore. And the thing that when fiction draws, that fiction has been drawing on mythology and folklore for decades in so many versions and repeating and rebooting and remaking it within itself, that like I said before, for vampires, how the modern idea of a vampire is so very often so very removed from the various folklore versions of vampires. It's kind of the same thing for witches, because in folklore, usually you are born with any kind of supernatural powers. It's very, let Antonia correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very rare that you actually learn how to use magic, unless you're like, I think that even the versions like magician, or like a magician, like a wizard, there's also some kind of natural affinity, like he's half human, half something, half human, half dragon.
Yeah, we have actually a wizard type of supernatural user in Zagorje, not necessarily Zagorje, but southern part of Croatia has something.
You mean northern part of Croatia?
Of Croatia has a wizard, Grabencijaštvijak.
He's like a pupil in the arts.
But he's more like a trickster.
But he's also born with his supernatural ability, and you can recognize him by some sort of body disfigurement. And he's literally like a student of magic that sometimes has his dragon to ride on, and his mentor is something very similar to Gandalf. No, Gandalf.
Oh, okay.
It's more similar to
yeah.
the devil. I'm not sure, but I forgot the mentor figure, how it's supposed to be called. So we have like wizard-like people, but it's never really. It's not like you can just come and say, "I want to learn it." No. You usually are born with some sort of magic already in you.
Yeah.
And there are just different type of stories and versions what happens when you get that.
So it's the same thing with Strigas and Strigas.
Yeah.
When you move from country to country, and even within a country, you might probably find different. It's usually some kind of a woman that does some kind of magic, usually a shapeshifter, but that's pretty much it. There are no hard and fast rules about it. Nothing. You can get really specific about what she does, how she does it, where she learned it, the way you can do with witches in fiction.
To put it plainly, it was an oral tradition, right?
Yeah, so things are going to change.
So it's very, very nebulous, which is why it's very thankful for, if you want to play with it, if you want to be inspired by it, but
Damien again asks, can you recommend any good folklore podcasts? That's a big question. I imagine there are as many folklore podcasts as there are true crime podcasts at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I used to listen to Lore years ago.
Lore?
Lore. It's just Lore. It's by Aaron Mahnke. Now, he usually did folklore from North America, but I think he'd been expanding recently. I haven't listened to it for a while.
Cool.
But yeah, he does this great thing about, folklore with both like witches, wizards, stuff like that, but mystical places and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm guessing that it's the only one that I know. But if you just type in like folklore podcast, you're bound to find like a deluge of it.
Yeah,
like you
I'd
said,
say so.
For crime, it's like.
We've got one more thing. This isn't such a question, but Andrea states, not a question, just a remark, that Croatia has dark fantasy writers. Things are just heating up, and the world will hear from Croatian dark fantasy given time.
Yeah. There are also
slightly ominous, but okay.
Yeah.
Well, what better way is there to talk about dark fantasy?
Okay.
And we have a few books that were translated or even originally published in English by Croatian authors. By late Lena Benini, there's Priestess of the Moon.
It's epic fantasy.
Epic fantasy. Then there is by the Wizard Press Tower.
Wizard Tower Press,
I think.
Wizard Tower Press, yeah.
Wizard Tower Press. They published the collection of stories by Alexander Žiljak,
which is like a heartfelt recommendation. He's one of the strongest authors in Croatia.
Yeah, he's
Cool.
Our genres.
I mean, both him and Milena.
Yeah.
Though unfortunately, Milena's I think best novels are only available in Croatian. Yeah. So there are books by Croatian authors that you find out, and there will be more.
Yes, there will. And I've got time for one more question, which I've got one here. This isn't from the chat. This is one I have noticed, which is, what myth or tale would you most like to read as a modern version or adaptation that hasn't been done yet? And I'll say not just read, but also see and adapted for film or TV as well. But one that hasn't been done yet, to your knowledge.
I mean, I would want to see my favorite.
Go on.
Bashtelic had Yugoslavian equalization, or old though, but I would like to see a modern version. Netflix maybe done.
Was it like live action?
Yeah, it was live
Okay,
action.
we need to see that.
Yeah. Igor, help me out. It's Čarovni mač.
Čudotvorni mač, yeah, the magical sword or miraculous sword. It was translated into English long ago. It's like something like magical sword or something. It's from the 50s. It's from the 50s, which when you watch it, you'll definitely notice it's from the 50s. But yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing the Jure Grando tale.
Yeah.
He's our most famous vampire, except he was like a werewolf, but, but not the werewolf, not the wolf.
He was from that age when vampires and werewolves were much more alike.
Same thing, basically.
Yeah,
in all
basically.
cases. Yeah.
Exactly the same thing, but the thing I like is his widow's story. I would like to see her version of events.
Okay.
Because he kept coming back and he was already dead, and he kept visiting with her. I think, is that the version? Yeah.
He kept demanding that she perform her wifely duties.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Until somebody staked him.
No, until she finally got fed up with him after like 2 weeks, and she asked the village elders to do something about it, and then they put together a team and they went to deal with him. Which is interesting, just because here's an interesting thing. But when they killed him, they didn't use a stake; they used a sickle.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Through the chest, or
No. This is old school, so you need to chop
cut the head off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No stakes through the heart, neck. No.
Ah.
Decapitation. You know the old stuff: decapitation, stuffing garlic in their mouths,
Oh yeah.
nails through their eyes. I have no idea.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, make sure he's dead.
Bury him face down, etc.
Yeah.
Cut off the left hand.
Okay.
Like, is that more of a Western thing then?
Which part?
No, I think the whole
Cutting off the left hand of the.
I think that the whole left-handed thing has to do with something again with Christianity and
Yeah, it's a more witchcrafty thing.
yeah, because
cut off the left hand so the soul can't leave the
left-handed
body.
people are much more rare, so they were usually like, oh, the mark of something. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, there's a reason why the word sinister came to mean evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, left-handed, red-headed, stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. So we have 5 minutes left, so that's just enough time there to wrap up before everyone has to leave. So I want to say thank you very much to Shtriga Publishing and to Igor and Antonia and Vesna for being here tonight. Thank you everyone who has watched, and thank you everyone for your questions. They've been great. It's been, I think, a really, really fascinating and insightful discussion here. So the next event from Glasgow 2024 is on the 11th of November at 7 p.m. It is Glasgow in 2024 presents Torific Tales with Alex Harrow and Catherine M. Valente in association with Tor. Tickets will be available on Eventbrite in the next few days. Please also keep your eyes open on our social media for any future updates and events. If you like this, then please do think about supporting us. And if you want to help build a WorldCon, then please do volunteer. We are looking for more people to help out in a number of areas. You can find us at glasgow2024.org and on Twitter at Glasgow in 2024, and of course on Facebook as well. So for one last time, I want to thank Vesna Kurilić, Antonija Mežnarić and Igor Rendić for coming, reading, and sharing their works, their passions, and their plans. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us,
Yes.
and thank you for a great evening.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, it has been fun.
Yeah, this was fun. Yeah.
And good night, all.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.